as he mentioned, I'll talk about some scaffold reflection exercises and group processing abilities. Let's define some things here. So effective cooperative learning requires communication and reflection on group functioning. And cooperative learning is the instructional use of small groups so that students work together to maximize their own learning and each other's learning. And this is really important when we take our classes with CERTL and the CERTL Center. We always talk about the importance of active learning. And oftentimes cooperative learning is a subset of that to encourage student engagement with material. And there are some tenets that make cooperative learning effective, such as positive interdependence, face-to-face interaction, individual accountability, the social skills of the students, how they interact with each other. And then there's this fifth factor, which is group processing that we'll talk about today. And group processing is the review of a group sessions to define the member actions that were helpful and unhelpful, to decide what actions to continue or change. And if you take it all together and increase the group processing, if the students reflect on what's happening in their teams or groups, you can enable proper social skills and group processing to empower cooperative learning groups to reflect on group actions and the role of each group member. So design thinking and communication, DTC, is the course that I'm looking at. It's a cooperative learning environment where teams benefit from effective group processing. And DTC is an amazing course. I highly recommend that you go on their website and see some of the amazing things the teams have designed. But in DTC, student teams design prototypes that address a wide range of societal needs. I just have featured here a one-handed game controller that they designed for someone with disabilities, or a specialized drinking cup for someone with disabilities as well. And these teams are incredible, but with any student team, they have their own group challenges, and they struggle sometimes with group communication, group reflection, and conflict management. And so when I talked to Professor DaCosta, who I worked with for this project, she said that the need was simple, timely guidance for student-driven team reflection, getting students to reflect on what's happening and really increasing their group processing abilities for their individual teams. So we implemented a scaffolded framework to encourage student reflection and group processing. It had 4 exercises that were done about 2 weeks apart, starting at the beginning of the quarter. And the first exercise was Rosebud Thorn, an exercise you may be familiar with, where you give your rose something that went well during the session, or your bud something that you're looking forward to, and a thorn something that's going badly for your team. Stop, start, continue is a similar concept, where you say something you want to stop, something you want to start, and something you want to continue. It's very action driven. The third section of the scaffold, and the reason why this is organized in this fashion, was goal, reality, options, way forward, which is the more complicated, more time intensive exercise for the students, where they needed to set a particular goal, discuss the reality of where that goal actually was, the options they could take to push the goal forward, and then set a plan for how they were going to achieve that particular goal for their team. And this was done later in the quarter, so students would have an opportunity to really discuss with their teammates and try and figure out their team functioning before they did this more intense exercise. And then we ended with a simpler exercise, which is I like, I don't like, let's change. Pretty self-explanatory there. So our goal is to evaluate the scaffolded approach to encouraging group processing. And we can define our research questions to investigate the effectiveness. The first research question we'll talk about is, do the student teams demonstrate effective group processing throughout the course? The second one was, do students view the group processing exercises as useful or effective? Our primary method of evaluation was a post-course survey, and I'll go through the methodology here for each research question. So for the first question, whether or not they demonstrate effective group processing, we had to define the key core requirements for what effective group processing is. And so we looked at the literature and we found these 3 main tenets that we thought would be very useful for applying to our DTC course. One was mutual performance monitoring. Are the students looking to monitor each other's engagement in the team and their actions towards their team goals and giving feedback? Mutual trust. Do they trust that they can get the actions done? Do they rely on their team members in that way? And do they have a shared mental model? Do they have a set goal that everyone is working towards, that everyone has decided is that works for them and for their team? And this area of the survey had 10 elements that were inspired by the literature and just slightly modified to suit the DTC course that we were looking at. And then for the second research question, whether or not they deem this as effective or useful, we were looking at the efficacy, ease, and engagement with the exercises. We evaluated the framework as a whole with 7 survey questions, And then they were asked to rate different aspects of the four different exercises with 5 separate questions. And for the survey, we received 15 responses out of the 32% class by the time I analyzed the data. And then we got a couple extra things after I made this presentation. So we currently have 20 responses to look at in the future, which is great. It's always good to have more responses. So getting into the data, the student teams demonstrated mutual performance monitoring, but the majority of students relied on professors for managing team dynamics. So let's break down all these bar graphs. So for these 3, we're talking about mutual performance monitoring. If we look at the survey prompt here, they were asked to indicate how much their assigned team did the following during the quarter. And for the question of were there multiple opportunities for teammates to share their thoughts on what went well, the vast majority said that this happened very much, which makes sense because we did implement this strategy, the scaffold, so they could reflect on their team actions. And then I received feedback from my teammates that helped improve my design skills. You see the majority of the students say that this happened very much, and then a smaller group said this happened at least somewhat, which is great because that means that mutual performance monitoring is happening. They are giving feedback to each other. And then for all team members were able to implement the necessary changes to address team challenges, we see a large group as well that say very much, and then a smaller group that says that this happened somewhat. But still, this is exciting because it means that students were giving feedback to each other, and then the students that they gave the feedback to were actually responding and addressing the team challenges in some way. What is interesting, though, if we look to the 4th bar here, is that the majority of students sought support from the students and sought support from the professors and managing team functioning dynamics, at least somewhat. Only a very small percentage, just 2 students out of the 15, said that this happened very little or not at all. And this here is going to be important when we move forward to start thinking about the role the professor plays in managing the teams and helping the students with their dynamic. A group of students appear to have struggled to trust their teammates and achieve consensus. We asked them to indicate how much they did the following throughout the quarter. And this group of students said that they only trusted their teammates to complete their work on time somewhat or very little, or that they took time to complete, to build consensus for key design decisions only somewhat or very little. And so this group of students is really interesting to look at, and we have lots of survey information from all the responses. So if you start picking out these groups of students, it can be very interesting to start thinking about how their struggles with their team, their issues with group processing led to them feeling differently about the scaffolded exercises, the individual exercises and such. So most of the students found the exercise to be at least moderately useful for discussing identifying challenges. And here we're getting into our second research question. They were asked to indicate to what extent the statement was true for them. And they said that these exercises made it easier to talk about problems and challenges with their team. They said that happened, a smaller group said exactly true, but most of them said that it happened at least somewhat, or it was moderately true. And these exercises helped my team identify problems. You get the same sort of spread where a group said that this was definitely true for them, and then a smaller group said that this was just moderately true, but at least there's some level of engagement with the exercise there. What's interesting is when we asked them if it would have been helpful to complete these exercises more often, there was a lot of consensus, and that was that they did not want to do this exercise more often. That was not at all true, and hardly true, being the largest groups for this response, which means that they probably had enough of the scaffolded exercises and reflection, but at least they found that when they were doing it, it was moderately helpful. So now we get into this cross-tabulation. So we found that the majority of the students who found the exercises to only be moderately helpful, they said moderately true, also did not fully voice their opinions in the exercise. And this gets into the concept of engagement. So we have our cross-tabulation here. So on the left-hand side, we have the exercises made it easier for me to talk about problems and challenges with my team. And on the right, you have, I voiced all of my concerns and opinions during the exercise, and the students were able to rank how true this was for them. And we see a couple groups appear. So we have this first group highlighted in green, where students who voiced their opinions during the exercise found it very helpful. It was exactly true for them. The exercise was helpful, and they also felt like they voiced their opinions. And then this other group appears of students that said that the exercise was moderately helpful or hardly helpful or not at all helpful. And they found here that the students also didn't fully voice their opinions. They only said it was moderately true or hardly true, that they voiced all of their concerns and opinions during the exercises. So they're holding back, they weren't fully engaging. And so a lack of student engagement with the exercise may have contributed to the perceived lack of usefulness. And we can look at some of the responses to see, to learn a little bit more about this engagement issue. So when the students didn't perceive the activities as useful for team functioning, they were less likely to engage in the activity. We have the first response here was, I think that the rosebud thorn activity was a good idea, but was completed as if it was a required assignment rather than something we wanted to do. Because of this, I don't think we put in 100% effort. And so you see a lack of student buy-in with the exercises just generally because they were required. Or someone said in response to the grow exercise, the third scaffolded exercises that was the most complicated of them, and honestly the most different between all of them. They said, again, this exercise was basically the same as the other exercises. I think if there was more variation in the exercises, the overall team engagement would have drastically improved. And so you see that this lack of engagement is problematic. So as far as we know, the exercises are perceived as at least somewhat useful, but lack of student engagement is a problem for future implementation of the strategies. And here we need to talk a little bit about what Professor DaCosta just observed anecdotally as the professor leading this course. She found that there was a limit to what the students could really do on their own with these activities. There was a subset of students, if we think back to that group that engaged fully, also thought the exercises were useful. There's a subset of students that did the exercises, they had only small challenges that they needed to address with their team, and the exercises worked really well for pushing them through to the next stage, and they enjoyed the exercises. Then there were students that were having bigger, more substantial team issues, and these exercises weren't able to really get them there because they couldn't fully engage, they couldn't fully voice their opinions, they couldn't fully think about how to improve the team without the help from the instructor. But she found that it was helpful for her, at least, to see how the students engage with the exercises and then determine where she can slide in to give more support to the students. So I think that there's a lot of data here. We're really excited to keep looking at it. And I'm hoping that we can put together a really cohesive story of how these students responded to the scaffolded strategy. So with that, I'd like to thank Professor DaCosta for her help as my mentor, Lisa Davidson, who helped a lot with the survey design, the DTC team who helped with the conceptualization of this project, and then the STAR program, Lauren, Rob, Nancy, and then my fellow STAR participants who gave me tons of excellent feedback over the past couple of months. So thank you for your time.